It's Monday, June 23rd, 2025, and we have a French fry slight risk of severe weather stretching down from the Great Lakes region into the Central Plains. And this is also going to be surrounded by an associated marginal risk of severe weather as well. And we have a little sneaky marginal risk of severe weather up here in northern Maine. Tomorrow's threat is going to be mostly a wind risk with a 15% slight chance of severe winds in our Great Lakes down to Central Plains risk area, surrounded by an associated 5% marginal risk of severe winds. And then up here in northern Maine, we have a teeny tiny 5% of severe winds up here as well. And then with our line of storms on our cold front in our Great Lakes down to Central Plains region, there is a conditional risk for small hail. And then we also have a pretty conditional risk of spin-up tornadoes along our line of storms along our cold front tomorrow, which also extends down from the Great Lakes into the Central Plains. Here's our simulated reflectivity from the HRRR, and we can see yesterday's storm complex pushing eastward in the morning hours. And what this will do, it will fall apart and then redevelop again in the morning hours along our front with that low-level jet right there. And then that will likely fall apart in the early morning hours. And then there will be a lull of weather in front of our front, allowing our ingredients to build. And then in the late afternoon, we start to see development along our cold front. Once again, with storm coverage being pretty full all the way down from our Great Lakes to central to southern plains region, with a couple of storm clusters in the early mode when they're more discrete, possibly becoming more strong and posing maybe a isolated hail and tornado threat. But pretty quickly by the evening hours to sunset, this is going to turn into a large line of storms, posing that threat for severe winds out here and a couple of spin-up tornadoes along our line. And a couple of areas of increased intensity could, one, be up here in the more northern portion of our risk, because of our jet max overhead, possibly providing more deep layer shear to the storms up here. And then down here in Kansas with a spinning low back here, possibly fueling these storms more. And then it's possible there could be more pockets of potentially better ingredients for storms, like increased vorticity or a more juiced up atmosphere in certain areas along our cold front, leading to areas of higher strength along our line than others. And as the low level jet kicks in, that's when our spin up tornado risk will likely maximize along with the strength of these storms. And then after that, as we go into the night hours, they kind of fall apart and just become messy rainmakers out here in Iowa into parts of eastern Nebraska and northeastern Kansas. Here are our 500 millibar winds today, and what we see is that our jet max is going to be up here over the northern United States, possibly bringing an area of increased storm ingredients in the northern portion of our risk, and then troughing down into other parts of our risk area in the central to southern plains. And another thing we notice is this large, strong ridge over the southeast and mid-Atlantic, and this is bringing some really above average temperatures to the region and a pretty formidable heat wave. Another thing to look at are 700 millibar winds, and we can see that they're going to be quite plentiful along our front, which will help to fuel those storms. I touched on the heat wave while we were looking at the 500 millibar winds, and to put it into perspective, right here, here's our ridge in the eastern US, and we can see really high temperatures throughout this entire region in the high 90s mostly. So definitely super warm out here in the eastern US. Here's a weather sounding from the more northern parts of our risk area, so Wisconsin and down into parts of eastern Iowa. And immediately our hodograph isn't really indicative of any certain severe weather. Our low-level helicity isn't super high. Our low-level shear isn't super high. And our bulk shear, so our sustaining winds that help spin those updrafts, is also pretty low. We don't have much veering in the winds at all. All of our wind vectors are pointing the same direction, but there are definitely a couple of other favorable things out here, like our lowest cloud level is going to be low enough to support that spin up tornado threat. Our low level lapse rates are going to be good, which will also support that spin up tornado threat and severe winds. And we have a really moist environment out here, which is also going to help support all hazards of severe weather. Our mid-level lapse rate is going to be 7.1 Celsius, decreasing per kilometer. Not bad, but also not good, but it will help to provide that rising motion for our storms and possibly fuel that threat for some hail out here, along with our cape near our freezing boundary. And then we see some mixing or drier loft, which would be indicative of a severe wind threat. Another thing is that we're going to have a really juiced up atmosphere out here, eclipsing 5,000 cape, so a super juiced up atmosphere for sure. Our precipitable water is going to be 1.89 inches, which could help to accelerate downdrafts and support that severe wind threat. Then our downdraft cape is going to be 1,500, so another thing that will help support that severe wind threat. And then our 3 cape is going to be pretty high as well at 195. So that would also support that threat for spin up tornadoes and severe winds. So in summary, this photograph is painting the picture of a line of storms capable of all hazards. So hail, spin up tornadoes, and severe winds. This is a different sounding from another area of increased interest near that surface low in Kansas. And our photograph immediately looks more interesting. We see some curving in our low levels. And down here, we see that our surface helicity is going to be much higher, as well as our low level shear, which would support that threat for spin up tornadoes. But our deep layer shear is going to be way lower than what we would like to see for spinning updrafts. So that could be an issue with organized storms down here. But we do see some wind veering, which could help to spin storms. And our lowest cloud level is probably going to be low enough to support that spin up tornado threat. Our low level lapse rates aren't anything special, and our mid level lapse rates are going to be pretty low as well at 6.8 Celsius, decreasing per kilometer. So despite even having a little bit of cape right here near our freezing layer, that threat for hail is going to be pretty small. So mostly small hail down here in the central to southern plains. Our convective available potential energy is going to be nearing 2,000. So definitely enough fuel for storms. Our precipitable water is going to be 1.73 inches, so enough to help accelerate those downdrafts and support that threat for severe winds. But we do see some capping out here in this region, so that could maybe make storms struggle a little bit and be weaker, but weather models are still predicting quite a bit of storm coverage down here. And another thing is that it's going to be quite moist at a 70 dew point, which would support some spin up tornadoes and that severe wind threat. Then we see a tad bit of dry air loft, which is another thing that could inhibit those storms along with that cape. But because storms are pretty confident of fire down here, it would likely just be something that would also help support that severe wind threat as well. So to summarize, the main threats down here in our central to southern plains risk area are going to be a couple of spin up tornadoes and mostly severe winds along a line of storms.